I've had students from churches in which members aren't allowed to go to the doctor or take medicines because supposedly that represents a lack of faith in God's healing power. Or from churches in which they have to get the pastor's permission to date someone or even to read a particular book. In contrast, churches that are truly welcoming and inclusive and focused on God's gracious forgiveness and mercy for all are few and far between. A couple of months ago, I asked Roberto and his wife how many other pastors they knew who weren't judgmental and legalistic, but instead understood the gospel in the way that they do. They looked at each other for a few moments, and then they could only come up with one name. That's why students such as Roberto come to study at the school where I teach, the Theological Community of Mexico, a consortium of Protestant and evangelical seminaries in Mexico City. Like Roberto, some of them are already pastors or are in other leadership roles in their churches. Sometimes they've studied at some kind of a Bible school or institute. Of course, there are others who are just beginning their studies to become pastors and prepare for the ministry at one of the seminaries, different seminaries associated with the theological community. But what all of our students have in common is that they're looking for something different. They're hungry to learn how to reach out to others with the gospel. Not a gospel that oppresses and excludes and marginalizes, which is not really the gospel at all, but the true gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ that liberates and empowers and transforms. Those who come to study want to learn to read the Bible differently, not in a fundamentalist or literalist way that ends up hurting people, but in a way that offers people hope and comfort and strength in the face of the struggles they encounter in their daily lives. They're anxious to study theology differently so as to be able to proclaim a God of love who stands for equity and justice and wholeness for all people. The God of Jesus who welcomes sinners just as they are with open arms, as in the sermon text I read, rather than a God devoid of grace and mercy like the God proclaimed by the Pharisees. The students are eager to learn how to preach and teach and lead worship in ways that create communities in which people build one another up through relationships of mutual love and caring, rather than fomenting an atmosphere of fear and repression and censure. Unfortunately, there aren't too many places in Mexico where that kind of preparation is available. In fact, I don't know of any other school in the entire country where people can come to study the Bible and Christian theology and ministry in the way that we teach it where I serve. You know, it's wonderful to be part of and to work with a church such as our own, the ELCA, which understands so clearly the gospel of God's free grace for all people. But no matter how well you and I may grasp the gospel of Jesus Christ, until we are going out to embrace the Felixes of this world, you and I are not being faithful to that gospel. While that undoubtedly involves reaching out to individuals who are suffering and rejected or in need, as Felix was, it also means reaching out to larger communities and societies where people's daily lives are characterized by hunger and poverty and injustice and violence. Places where so many people see no recourse but to turn to things like paint thinner just to try to get through the day. Places like Mexico where 15 million people have to try to live on less than $1 a day, and another 35 million on less than $2 a day. That's almost half of Mexico's population. Proclaiming the gospel isn't just about saying everybody's welcome here. It's about going out to those who live forgotten and abandoned by our societies, those whom no one else cares about. Obviously, of course, we can't reach out to all of those in need on our own. We need to join hands with others and work with them. That includes being involved in ecumenical efforts with other churches, such as the one I participate in at the theological community. Efforts that are aimed not at gaining more members for our own church as if our goal were to turn everybody into Lutherans, but in enabling people to see and hear and experience the gospel in a way that transforms them in body and soul and spirit as individuals and as communities. And from my perspective, one of the most vital ways to accomplish that is by working to prepare pastors and leaders like Roberto, who not only understand that gospel clearly, but have the preparation and skills and knowledge necessary to reach out effectively to others with that gospel and build up communities where people are continually being transformed and empowered by it. As a missionary involved in training people for ministry, my dream is to see Mexico and the world filled with pastors and leaders like Roberto. Such leaders can be active in their own contexts, accomplishing their things that you and I could never accomplish in the same way. And at the same time, when they're prepared in the way that we work to prepare them where I teach, they're involved in raising up even more such leaders. That's what's so important about leadership training when it's done properly. Because one good leader spawns other good leaders, who in turn spawn even more. It's a ministry that multiplies itself many times over. I can think of no better example of that than the story of Roberto and Felix. Thanks in large part to Roberto's efforts, Felix has grown into a person who now shares the gospel with others in many ways. The young man who was formerly so aggressive that his family tied him up has now been transformed into one of the most gentle and affectionate persons you could ever meet. He's now able to not only to take care of himself by selling sandwiches out on the street to earn his own money, but to reach out to those around him. Some time ago, Felix asked Roberto to teach him how to play the guitar so that he could help with the music at their church. And then, to Roberto's surprise, he asked Roberto to teach him how to preach. A few months ago, shortly before I came up for the summer, Felix preached his first sermon at Roberto's church. And you know the text that he chose to preach on? The text that I chose for the gospel lesson today. The story of the sheep gone astray, helpless and all alone. The sheep so lost that almost everyone had given up on him. The sheep that almost everyone had abandoned for dead. Almost everyone, but not everyone. Because there was a shepherd. A shepherd who refused to give up on that sheep, who wouldn't rest until he was able to bring that sheep back into the fold in his arms, to caress him and bind up his wounds and help restore him to wholeness. When Felix preached that sermon, he said, "I am that sheep." But you know, amazingly, Felix is no longer just that sheep. He has now become the shepherd as well, reaching out to embrace others with God's love in the same way that Roberto once reached out to him. That is what the gospel does to people. As individuals, as congregations and communities, and as a church body, Jesus is calling you and me to be that kind of shepherd as well. Shepherds who not only welcome sheep into the fold, but actively reach out to embrace those whom no one else wants to embrace, to untie those who are bound, to help those whose lives have become a mess get all cleaned up, to restore to wholeness those who are broken, and hurting and in need. And as we do so, it is not only they who are transformed in ways that no one could ever imagine, but you and I as well. Amen.